Hey there, welcome to episode 64 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 3:30 p.m., January 29, 2025. January is almost over. What does that mean? Nothing. Today's episode is the 2 challenges. Hey, if this is the first time you've ever listened to the Quaggling Sand audio program, you're probably wondering, what is Quaggling Sand anyway? Well, you probably would call this phenomenon pins and needles, that return of circulation to, let's say, a limb, a leg, a foot, an arm, a hand. Maybe you were sitting on it, maybe you were laying on it, maybe you fell asleep on it, whatever it is, numb, and then that circulation returns. Quaggling Sand, of course. This is an audio program dedicated to stories and tales and reflections. It's sort of a vanity project, but hey, maybe one of these days I'll have a guest or two. Who knows? Who can say? Episode 64, though, we're coming along. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. The show notes contain a summary, which I will read to you, and the links for today's episode, only the shameless 2 self-promotion links today. I could have dug up some stats and whatnot, but anything greater than 0 applies to these 2 challenges. So let us begin. Today's summary. I described my general motivation for pursuing a career in engineering, which itself is rather broad, in a previous episode. While I have focused on technology, mostly computers, there were 2 general problems I always felt should be solved that I have always had on a list somewhere behind the back burner. I'm kind of annoyed. I think, I don't know if you can hear that spacebar. I'm using the spacebar to pause. I can use a mouse. Yeah. Either way. The links, as usual, I pause so I can get a drink of water or something, because we don't have a guest, so I can just pause at will. The links for today's episode is, like I said, the shameless 2, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. The former is a profile page with links to my various audio projects. There are 4, and there should be a 5th one coming along. Oh, I'm going to update that link. The Hugo Floss program will re-enter service at some point, but totally different format. You can also visit and there are some other links on there about other projects and some my favorite coffee beans and so on. You do not have to spend any money. You are not obligated in any way, but if you do, proceeds through either of these platforms will go towards the purchase of coffee beans or coffee making devices, equipment, and accessories. These are the things that power my endeavors, at least as far as they are listed there. If you visit the posts section of the profile page on Buy Me a Coffee, so it's linked at the top or it's way at the bottom of the page that you will visit, you will find Buy Me an Update, a weekly micro episode posted on Mondays. Episodes, very quick summary of the previous week's episodes and whatever's coming up. I try to keep it under 5 minutes, maybe 4.5, micro. Ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo does not support the direct posting and hosting of audio, as does buymeacoffee.com. So I post textual updates on Ko-fi.com. I know it's coffee, but I want to emphasize the unusual spelling, like the Oneaters. So yeah, no obligation, but these platforms are used by open source developers, content creators, and others as a way to engage their audience. Dare I say fans, supporters, etc. So I've had these for years. I can't say that I'm not going to be an oligarch anytime soon as a result of my creative endeavors. So a quick recap, I just referred to the fact that I kind of talked about this. I went into this in greater detail in the Why Engineering episode 61. So recently, like almost a month ago. But the quick catch up, if you didn't want to listen to that one, I always wanted to be a pilot. I was going to join the U.S. Air Force. I was always fascinated with aircraft and flying and so on. But my vision was literally my eyeballs. My vision was not going to be good enough to pass the uncorrected vision requirements back in that era. Since then, I believe they have allowed radial keratotomy, astigmatic keratotomy, and other corrective surgeries and so on. So Back in those days, you had to be genetically perfect. At the same time, I always found computers and technology to be maybe the core underlying interest. Like from a flying perspective, I was interested in flight controls and how planes function. So aeronautical engineering, for example. Maybe given that I could learn to code at age 10 or so, maybe that was a good fit. And while flying was a bit more involved, you can learn to fly at age 10, but that's a little bit more unusual. The resources for learning to program, I was the bored kid. Was I 10 or 11? I think maybe I was 11, somewhere in there. You look bored and we just got some new computers at our school. Why don't you go play with them or something? So that worked out in my favor. So I was able to learn how to code and put hands on keyboard, learn how technology worked pretty early on. Flying would take place later, but even still, my eyeballs were not in it for the long haul, I suppose. The whole entire flight. So I grew up, so I became more of an engineer, technologist, general, I guess polymath is a word, interested in many things, including flying. I'm still interested and fascinated with flying, and certainly flight control systems, digital state space, and so on. Still a thing. So I grew up in Phoenix. While I am from New Jersey, I am of the Phoenix metropolitan area. I think we moved there when I was just about to turn 6 years old. And so I grew up in the desert, not the humid and actual season-laden New Jersey area, that part of the country even. Snow, rain, humidity, hot, humid summers, cold, wet, slushy, icy winters. So in Phoenix, in the desert, this meant cold and dry winters, hot and dry summers. Dry, the operative word there. So we always had an artificial tree for Christmas, or just in general, specifically to ease setup and tear down. They're just easier to deal with than trying to go and get a tree and hauling it home and making a big mess, and then you got to deal with it when you're done, and to avoid conifer needles and other detritus, leading to additional maintenance of the tree in the home. So as it's set up, it's shedding needles as it eventually runs out of whatever is keeping it, quote unquote, alive in captivity. Not to mention looking after it in general. You have to make sure it doesn't get all dried out. So you got to keep it moist. We never did have a swimming pool, though my grandmother did have a backyard pool that was rarely used. Public pools were and probably still are common in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area, with summer lifeguard jobs always advertised to your local school swim teams for public pools. Most people with a backyard swimming pool do not have lifeguards, not full-time on duty and trained, basic life-saving. So the two challenges, the first challenge is this: tree fires. The dry winters and the tendency to keep homes warm leads to holiday trees drying out easily. Yes, there are automated watering systems by now, but those who chose real trees for the holidays are still signing up for caring for the tree. Hopefully, once the holidays are over and the tree is still drying out, and then and everybody goes back to school and work, well, the tree's still there. Removing decorations and disposing of the tree, which could be left on a street curb or somewhere nearby, or perhaps dropped at a disposal center to properly deal with the tree, the Christmas tree, the holiday tree. You could often leave them on the curb on a particular pickup day during the post-holiday season, given the expectations on the part of your local waste management company, entity, government service, that this would be the case. So tree recovery or retrieval for the purposes of discarding them was one of those things that you have to deal with. Procrastination is real, which I can speak on more at length later. But there are real consequences in the scenario if, for example, you chose to not discard the tree in a timely manner when they're being picked up from the curb. How many times would you see a Christmas tree sitting there in February, March, April? Maybe February they would pick it up, but tree pickup probably took place every 3 months or something. I don't remember, but it wasn't every week. Too often, like more than 0 times, the simple act of ignoring a drying tree in warming weather, in a dry climate, in what is possibly a heated home, with maybe some lights strewn around the tree, some lingering decorations that were still not taken down, would end in house fire and injury or even death. Which century is this? Which one was it? I think we're still maybe one later. The other challenge, backyard pool drownings, still a thing. I mentioned the swimming pool notion for the Phoenix area with lifeguards posted at public pools, but no such requirements for those big bodies of water, often unfenced and uncovered in backyards everywhere. If you ever look at a satellite image of Phoenix, especially modern times, the satellite imagery is pretty good. You'll get a sense of just how many swimming pools there are without lifeguards and so often unfenced. Even with fencing surrounding a swimming pool, it is possible for a young child, even a crawling toddler, to make their way through many fences. That is to say, a variety of fences, unless specific focus is placed on avoiding this, which often ends quite sadly. So if you don't account for the possibility of a very small child making it between the bars of the fence, the classic swimming pool fence is probably got like 4-inch separation between metal verticals. It's intended really to keep out big dogs, maybe, but where there's a pool, kids find a way. And even if people considered the fence, they didn't always go through with it. A very smart person that I attended college with, engineer, so smart. He and his wife had a child. They had a swimming pool. He literally said to me one day, "We're thinking about putting a fence up, but it will block the view. Call Child Protected Services." No, this was decades ago, so too late. So even with fencing, you never know. And then if you don't bother putting the fence up, there's no lifeguards. The usual scenario: someone looking after a child or children is distracted, looks away for just a second. The child or children, and by the way, if it's children, maybe an older or larger child may entice, like, "Oh, hey, let's go to the swimming pool. Let's go get that toy floating. Let's go grab that pool noodle," or whatever the case. So who knows what's possible. They are able to escape restrictions. They might approach the pool pursuing those big toys, or maybe it's just the shimmering water, or I've seen the adults playing in this. It must be fun. Who knows what else. And the splash unheard. I was only looking away for just a second. It was just a second. So those are the things. I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time, but they would be in the news, and especially if you're home for the summer, the pool. Now the pool is usually there, and people, the pool doesn't go away. If you've installed a swimming pool in your backyard, if they've dug out the swimming pool, like, "Oh, I didn't even know we had a pool there." So you dig out all that dirt, you create a rebar and cement and whatever else, and you build a pool with a deck, and you're like, "Should we get a fence?" The view though. And then there are kids, and the kids could be from next door. A ball goes over the fence. The child goes to retrieve it from the pool. They fall in. There's nobody home. Nobody's been watching that pool. So things don't end well. Countless stories of, and so, I'm like between 6 and 10 years old, probably somewhere in there, when I started noticing these things. And then, through junior high school, you just hear news all the time. How are children falling into swimming pools and dying, or perhaps not as bad, but problems, definitely not good. Nobody's looking. Nobody's trying to keep track of this. There are pool covers that have been devised, pool covers that are automatically retractable, that you can stand on. So the entire water surface is covered with a retractable. Now this requires a lot of installation. They basically tear up your pool deck and they put in motorized tracks, and the covering is recessed, so it's under the deck, like a slot that's over the water. So it looks pretty cool, and it's very neat. That's one version of this. And you'll see someone go walk out onto it. Hey, you can walk on this. You can drop a car on this. It's not gonna, because one of the problems with a pool cover that's just sitting on the water, that's almost worse, because now someone falls into that, and this could be an adult, could be somebody who even knows how to swim. They fall on a cover and they fall into the water through the cover. Now they're wrapped in a pool cover, and they become disoriented. They become tangled up. that cannot end well also. So merely putting a cover, not always useful. Merely putting up a fence, if it's not tall enough, if the children are not able to, or are able to thwart the fence, if they can get through it, around it, over it. Sometimes the gate of the fence will be easily opened, so making it therefore completely useless. Of course, one way to go is to teach the children to swim immediately, like home from the hospital into the swimming pool, right? If you're going to have a pool, they should be able to at least get out. But then, do they know to get out? Can they just maintain floating? I don't know. But the bottom line to me was, why is this still happening? This seemed like, I just went through a couple of possible solutions. The notion of having a big, giant killer swimming pool in your backyard where an unsuspecting an unsuspecting child or parent even could experience such loss due to just having this thing that may not even be in use. I mentioned my grandmother had a swimming pool in her backyard, very rarely used. So you basically have this huge maintenance and safety liability, and then people leave it to chance, which is crazy to me. So as an engineer, over the years, when I was pursuing this, and now that I am one, I've always kind of wondered why is this still a problem? Now, people drown in swimming pools, they drown in lakes, the ocean. These things are always possible. But the swimming pool, the pool of water that has been installed, now it's the same as it's true of a bathtub, right? Or a sauna, or I'm not a sauna, I'm sorry, a hot tub. Maybe you have a sauna too. A hot tub, a swimming pool, I'm sorry, a bathtub, hot tub, swimming pool. These are items that are installed. They are a matter of choice. Like, you can't really shut down a lake. Can't put a fence around the ocean. You can build a wall. You can try. But it's really difficult to prevent people from entering these huge natural bodies of water. But you have choice when you put in a pool in your backyard. So the fact that there are still people placed in harm's way just because of behavior, lack of security considerations, lack of training, that is teaching children to not go to the pool and swimming and so on. I'm sure there are methods that a child psychologist would probably want to reflect on, right? I've heard these stories from my own youth. Oh, when I was a kid, they would just throw me in the pool and I had to swim, sink or swim. I don't know if that's good, but essentially, if there is a risk of a child dying in a swimming pool, it seems like some action could be taken. So through the years, I've pondered different possibilities, not the least of which is something like, well, one of the things, okay, as webcam technology and the internets came along, my ideas moved in that direction. But initially I was thinking, well, why couldn't you have a device that would detect splashing and create a huge loud alarm? What about something that would essentially an automated lifeguard, right? So something that would actually go identify, like capture the moving thing, some sort of a bulk ejection device. At one point I even thought, because remember the space shuttle? Remember way back when? The space shuttle, the engines, the three main engines on the space shuttle itself, they have turbo pumps, and I remembered the analogy was made describing how powerful they were. They could empty a backyard swimming pool in 3 seconds, right? That's how much fuel, oxygen, hydrogen, that's how much fuel they're pumping through the turbo pumps in the space shuttle back then. So I was like, well, why couldn't you do something like that? Just empty the swimming pool. That's not totally practical and possibly even dangerous. Who knows what you're going to suck up into those turbo pumps? But where would that water go? That would be exciting, wouldn't it? But at least people would know something was going awry in that backyard. But once webcams came along, then it became a question of, well, why can't you visually recognize some sort of turmoil, splashing, an object below the water that was above the water, etc. So what could you recognize? And now, if we fast forward to modernity, we have so much artificial intelligence capability, so much that it's getting headlines and moving markets and destroying jobs and wrecking our future. But generally speaking, and even a decade or more ago with the Kinect, the Xbox Kinect device could do figure recognition. It could figure out if you're moving your hand, gesture recognition. It could pick up on finger gestures. There are radar devices that are, I don't think they're in Pixel phones anymore from Google, but they had at least one that had a small radar device. So it was extremely high frequency radio signals that would bounce off your fingers. They could pick up really small gestures, very fine movement, motion. So not so much recognition visually, but shape identification and motion detection and so on. So gestures, image recognition, motion, classification of these things. You could tell the difference between a ball and a person, etc. So all these technologies move on. Now, I will say in the interim, somewhere in there, I was like, a philosophical moment. I said, I guess when you think about what's more important, not having tragedy in your backyard or being overprotective. Pardon me. So one of my theories with the advent of the webcam and the internet and various websites and so on, I said, well, what if we crowdsource backyard lifeguards or at least observers? So what if you just had anyone who wanted to look at any backyard swimming pool camera anytime could do so? And if they reported a potential, impending catastrophe, say maybe the person's not drowned, maybe they're not even drowning. It could be a child approaching a swimming pool. Hey, there's something going on here, and alert the authorities or, so take some action based on this. Now you'd have to be very careful to isolate the location information. There could be no identity shared in the imagery. You could even do something like wireframes, so you could convert the imagery to wireframes rather than seeing pure imagery. But in theory, even if it's somebody who, how can I put this delicately, likes to watch children at swimming pools for no good reason, who would identify this? The outcome is really the goal, not the motivation, I suppose you could say. So proper privacy controls and whatnot. Now this would be a extremely controversial approach to this, but generally speaking, if you look at Twitter, there are people with a lot of time on their hands. And if you give them something actually life-saving to consider rather than trolling and whatever else goes on there, well, that seemed to be an interesting possibility. But we've advanced in a very short period of time now to the possibility that an actual artificial intelligence technology implementation locally, not even sending imagery over the internet, right? There's enough personal computing, home computing, and the Xbox Kinect device, Kinect, could do some relevant things. Probably not long distance enough, not long range. It was too close. I think you had to be within 3 feet or something. So theoretically, you could mount a webcam or two just watching your swimming pool at some distance, and an identifiable object or objects that enter or become too close to some boundaries, some virtual fences, could isolate these images and then take appropriate action, like alerts, sending an alert, calling 911 automatically, any number of things. The nice thing is with all this technology that's at hand and only becoming more available, if you don't have to upload images to anywhere, you're now not concerned with, who's going to see my pictures, who's going to see whatever. Now, you could make an exception and send, have an automated photo or video clip of what's happening to report to life-saving authorities, emergency response, public safety, paramedics, firefighters, etc. Like kind of an APB, like, hey, this is happening here. But that would be the only instance. There would not be a continuous stream of video and whatnot being uploaded to a cloud somewhere in a parts unknown. So by keeping all the monitoring technology local, you're no longer sacrificing privacy. You're no longer placing anyone at risk, even with risk mitigations in place. You just never know, right? So you're not uploading video. You're not going to have video of your children floating around the internet. No video of yourself even. So all the imaging and processing and classification and assessment would be taking place locally. This still places a lot of sort of risk mitigation in the virtual hands of automation and artificial intelligence. but this seems like something worth testing. So even though this was a challenge that I had left on the back burner for many years, at this point now it's like it's one of those things that could actually be viable. So this has probably made it at least to the back burner, and we'll see how a couple of things work out in the near future. Pardon me, regarding some hardware possibilities. And then the fire. Here's the deal. Over the years, now so a burning Christmas tree is a little bit easier to deal with. Well, before it's burning, there's a thing in the world called sensors. Like they sense things like your five senses. So you can very easily have a sensor package. You can take a humidity sensor for the air, the ambient humidity. You can take a temperature sensor, ambient temperature. You can take a moisture sensor to measure the moisture content of the tree. You could, so temperature, humidity, did I say temperature? Ambient temperature, ambient humidity, tree moisture, and so the moisture in the tree. So you would actually tap the tree, you would measure the xylem and phloem and see what's going on. If the tree itself was becoming dry, you should be able to detect at least some degree of that. You could also detect the amount of water that is in the reservoir in which the tree is resting. And now hopefully people would have cut the tree properly so that water would be drawn up into the, and I can't remember which one draws up, xylem in and phloem out, maybe? I can't remember. It's basically the internal circulatory system of a tree or a plant in general. So you have to cut the tree when you get it home so that the wet ends of the xylem and or phloem are exposed, probably at an angle. Anybody who's ever anyone who's ever cut flowers, you cut them at an angle so that when you put them in water, they will draw the water up into them and last a little bit longer. Same with a tree. Similar with a tree. So you'd be able to actually measure, maybe if you tap the trunk of the tree, a foot above the bottom of the tree, for example, or something to be determined, you could measure the moisture. And if that part of the tree becomes dry, then you would know that the tree is not actually drawing moisture up from the reservoir in which it's resting and that water is evaporating. So that would place you, hopefully, in a mode where you're thinking, okay, this tree is going to dry out sooner than I was thinking. You can couple this with visual, camera, looking at the tree, observing things like color shift of the tree towards brown. You could also detect carbon monoxide. It's not funny. If for some reason the tree is dry enough and a light strewn about the tree, a string of lights, if for some reason something like a decoration or anything, any aspect of what's going on with this tree causes some smoldering, causes something to get overly warm and somehow eventually catch and ignite the tree. Anyone who's ever seen a Christmas tree, especially a dry one, go up, if you blink, you'll miss it, and now you will see an entire room on fire. So a Christmas tree is essentially a firebomb sitting in the corner of a room with no technologically advanced monitoring. It's merely the whim of a person who post-holiday is getting back to work or school and not necessarily focusing on these things. When it comes to tree fires or fires in general, the fire extinguishing technology has come a long way. I always said, why couldn't, and especially when I was working at companies that had this in their server room, they would have a halon fire suppressant, fire retardant, I guess, intended to completely block out the oxygen in the room so that if there were a fire, an electrical fire, you can't really douse an electrical fire with water. That causes other problems. So you would basically flood a server room or a closet or something with halon that would replace the oxygen in the local atmosphere, and the fire would go out. Lack of oxygen, right? Oxidation. Flame is oxidation, requires oxygen and heat and fuel. So remove the oxygen, fire goes out. So I was like, why couldn't there be like a powder fire retardant? Fire suppressant would probably be later. Slow down the fire. So some sort of a powder that would not cause water damage to the house, but if there was a way to detect the the early stage, like the initial, like you could monitor with infrared or with temperature, and then that gas sensor for carbon monoxide, that if something started to smolder, if there is any carbon monoxide coming up off that tree, you should be able to detect that, and then you can assume this is not right, and some sort of a explosive dispersal of a flame retardant powder, right? Sounds good, right? In the interim, somewhere like many years ago, I saw this. Somebody has devised now I will say there are spherical fire suppressant extinguishers, right? That are in jet engines, for example, in airplanes. I think they're like a brass sphere, and if you ever have an engine fire, a jet engine fire, which is tricky because you have to, there is flame in the fuel is burning in the engine and so on. So if there is a problem that leads to a fire in the engine, that's fire that's uncontained, the fire suppressant will be, it's a fire extinguisher. It will attempt to, something like the halon, it will attempt to completely extinguish the fire. So it's there. So the problem is when you can douse a fire passively and try to with a flame retardant, it will slow down the fire. Hopefully, it will slow it to a stop. In the scheme that I suggested initially, it would be like a one shot, like a snake flying out of a Pringles can, right? Like this powder, dry extinguishing substance would slow down the fire. So hopefully it would slow down the smoldering effect. So you would have no fire. But it's a one-shot deal, right? So you wouldn't have a fire suppressing action that follows, right? So sweeping water, if you've ever taken an emergency response course, as I have, they train you on how to extinguish a fire. You are sweeping water back and forth. You're trying to cool the area. That's what water does, is removes the heat. So you continue to do that to suppress the fire. So essentially extinguishing it by removing these elements. That could be another way. There would be some robotics involved, perhaps, or multiple shots of this retardant substance, the powder that I'm envisioning. At one point, I even thought of like exploding Christmas tree ornaments, or holiday tree ornaments, if you like. So these would be built into the tree. Essentially, you'd hang them from the very same branches that the lights and the tinsel and the garland and other stuff is hanging from. And in the event of some, they'd basically respond to heat, and they would pop. Maybe you could envision that. So not necessarily an explosion, but if they're close enough to a heat source. Now, obviously, this would be too late if it's getting really hot, because that means something's already possibly ignited. Anyway, I was always bouncing around different ideas for this, and I think, so I was going to say that somebody has invented a spherical ball. It looks like a ball. And in their demonstration, I'm sure you can find this on the internets, but it's not totally relevant here. But they have this ball of chemicals, and they would set a dumpster on fire. I'm hoping I'm not triggering anyone with mentioning dumpster fires in today's news climate. But a dumpster, a classic, big slanted top steel dumpster. So something is burning, a pretty good sized fire burning in this thing, and someone walks up with one of these balls. The ball is about the size of like maybe a soccer ball, maybe let's roughly say like a foot in diameter, maybe a little bit bigger, but something like that. And they throw the ball with some force into the dumpster, and it goes out. The fire goes out. So the ball clearly, possibly on impact, or maybe when it burns on the outside, this powder, but it is a dry substance, puts the fire out. And initially I was thinking, oh, okay, that's problem solved. But there are two things. One, what is the exact delivery mechanism? Here it's like you visually identify something is on fire. You throw this container at the fire. It has to disperse the substance that's inside the ball. And again, whether that's force or whether that's heat, whether melts the outside, or however this happens. But the second thing is you have to actually be monitoring. So if you don't see the fire in the dumpster, you're not going to throw the ball. So there's still the question of monitoring, right? Same with the swimming pool. If nobody's there to see the fire, did it burn? If nobody's, like the tree falling in the forest. So the problem with a tree fire is not necessarily the extinguishing. I mean, when you think about it, you can have in modern buildings. I myself, there is one sprinkler head in the ceiling about maybe 2 feet to my right, so like straight up. So if I were to measure the triangle, the short leg of the triangle is about 2 feet. The ceiling is 11 feet, so 6 feet above me or something. 7 feet, 6, 5, 4 feet, whatever. Simple math. So say 5 feet above me, 2 feet to my right, sprinkler head. There's another one maybe about 10 feet to my left. So these sprinklers could just go off and they could put a tree fire out. If your home does not have sprinklers, so it was constructed before sprinklers became normal fire code for new construction, you might live in an apartment, you might live in a standalone home. If you have not retrofit your home, you may not have these sprinklers. So now you don't have the sort of passive suppressant system, which is going to be a deluge of water when the tree is on fire. The tree is on fire by the time a suppressing system like a sprinkler is shooting water all over your house. So the question is, can you stop the fire before it becomes a fire? So with proper detection, proper sensors, sensor fusion, my theory is still you'd be able to retard the fire, keep it from growing into a fire, if you can catch those early signs like a dry tree, certainly carbon monoxide if there's something smoldering, and a few other things. Like I can think of basically a collection of sensors. I mentioned some of them. There may be some other ones. There may be like an IR sensor that would just detect at a distance. You could detect an increase in temperature in a region. Anyone who's ever seen those they look like a yellow fluke IR thermometer. So it points a little red targeting laser of sorts, and it's generally measuring a cone in front of it, and you can get a temperature reading that's pretty reasonable based on infrared measurements, right? So you can measure that the temperature of a pipe in your 11-foot ceilings without getting a ladder. You just point the thing at the pipes. So you could do something similar with a tree. You could have the sensors in different, pointing at different sides of the tree. You could have it pointing at the rear of the tree if it's in a corner, so you wouldn't be able to see that generally if you're walking by, but you'd have sensors that are watching your back. Same with the swimming pool, really, when you think about it. You basically have sensors that are always being checked, always measured in an intelligent way to assess risk at any given moment. Is that a person? Is that a person entering the pool? What's pool proximity for a small person? Right? You'd be able to make assessments about whether the person was crawling or walking, or if they had breached a fence, a protective fence surrounding a swimming pool. So you'd basically be able to describe the setting to your artificial lifeguard ahead of time. So it kind of has some parameters to compare against, and it could just be always vigilantly watching your swimming pool, even at night. Right? You can either use IR lighting to capture probably so-called black and white, not quite monochromatic, but if you've ever seen IR imagery, it's usually, you can do the colorful stuff, but it's essentially looks like black and white TV with some bright spots for heat. I'm sorry, not heat. Stuff that reflects IR light better. So it's not a heat detection device. It's merely picking up the infrared light, and however infrared light bounces off human, warm skin versus cold surfaces. I've not really explored that too much. Either way, you could essentially have your pool, your swimming pool, your body of water, even same with a hot tub. Technically, you could do the same with a bathtub. So if there's a living being thrashing around, or even not thrashing around, like, hey, there's a person in a body of water that shouldn't be there or is not moving, or, you could do all kinds of stuff, all kinds of detection. Same with the Christmas tree. You should be able to detect all those properties, those chemical transitions I was describing, and make some intelligent decisions about that. So essentially that's where we are. As it happens, as I'm telling this story, I may or may not be more adjacent to some artificial intelligence accelerating hardware to do what's called the inference locally in a performant manner. So I'm kind of interested in whether these could come forward from the back burner. I probably have enough sensors from my days in the Intel hackathon circuit so that I could actually build the sensor part, at least some of them. These sensors, by the way, and here's the really sad part, a web camera can be had for $50 maybe. The computing to do the analysis, the real-time local analysis, can be had for small hundreds. Like, you don't really need a gaming machine. You just need enough processing to analyze maybe 2 live streams, maybe 3 web camera images of a pool, right? Depending on the size of the pool and so on. So you're talking hundreds of dollars for that. You're talking pennies or small dollars for sensors for a Christmas tree or a holiday tree fire sensing system, the suppressant or retardant, depending on how that would be implemented in a sort of a, whatever the scenario is, whatever the room, whatever the building codes are at that time, etc. But all of these things are doable for what is essentially free in the scope of life and death. So yeah, these were always lingering. Like, why are these still problems? They're lingering in the back of the old, hey, I'm going to be an engineer, but yeah, why aren't these still problems? There are a host of problems, but these to me are low-hanging fruit. They would be great examples. Maybe a hackathon could challenge these sorts of things. These are right up there with poison control issues, like why do kids eat pills or poisons, right? Child protective caps are only openable by children. Things like this. So the means to avoid simple accidents, simple gaps in awareness, and so on. The means exist. The technology is only advancing. Do we need high tech for these things? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. If there's ever been a collection of problems that are rife with potential solutions via actual hackathons, that is to say, if we're going to do poison control, we should have hackathons with 2-year-olds. Here, try to open this. Damn. Okay, try to open this. Okay, try to open this. They're opening all the things. But seriously, these are the class of problems that I think have kind of been swept under the rug because they're just not exciting. And yet they certainly become exciting in the worst possible ways for some. And I think they're solvable. So let's see if I can finally close the book on at least one of these in the coming weeks and months. Fingers crossed. Updates to follow. I've kind of gone on about this, but these really are, to me, there's a person who started a company to feed people with food that's otherwise thrown away, and she describes it as solving the world's dumbest problem. But I don't know. These are the kinds of things that compete with that. Solving dumb problems. Let's do it. And that's where I'll leave it for today. Thank you for listening. As always, Quaggling Sand, your story time. Hopefully you got something out of this. Thank you for listening again, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.